Hello, everyone. I am Jackson Parker, a second-year DMA candidate in trombone performance and pedagogy, and also a bass trombonist in the Illinois Wind Symphony. And I am honored to welcome Professor Jim Pugh, who is our own Professor of Jazz Studies in trombone and composition and arranging, and also honored to welcome Jeff Tyzik, a Grammy-award winning composer, arranger, trumpeter, and conductor who has created over 500 orchestrations and compositions. So I think we can just start by saying that Professor Jim Pugh is going to play Jeff Tyzik's Concerto for Trombone and Wind Ensemble on our Illinois Wind Symphony concert, April 30th. It's a Thursday at 7:30 p.m. in the Krannert Center, Great Hall. And I thought we would just start with each of you kind of telling us about how you got started in music, kind of your journey to where you are now.
You have the floor.
Okay, yeah. Well, I was a young kid, and I remember seeing a drum and bugle corps walking down the street, and I liked the sound of the bugle. My 8th birthday was coming up, and I said, my parents said, well, what do you want for your birthday? I said, I want a bugle. And day of my birthday, there was this case there, and I opened it up, and there was this thing, it looked like a bugle, but it had these buttons on the top of it. And I cried, and it was a cornet. And so anyway, I think it was in 3rd grade. And right away, they got me a private teacher, and his name was Elmer Musselman. He was 77 years old, and he had played in the Goldman Band in the 20s in New York, which was this famous concert band. So I had a good teacher from the beginning, and eventually this friend of mine, great saxophone player who passed away, Chris Vidala, who played with Chuck Mangione for many, many years. Chris was at this place called the Eastman School of Music. And my band director was a Fredonia guy. And he was a trombone player, by the way, Jim. I don't think I ever told you that. Oh. And so he said, you should go to Fredonia, become a band director. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds like what I should be doing. So I took an audition and got in. But Chris said to me, you need to come to the Eastman School. And there's this guy here, Chuck Mangione. And he actually sent me a recording of Chuck's works. And it just kind of blew my mind. And so I went to Eastman, I auditioned, and I got in. So then in 1969, one of the people I met there was Jim Pugh. Jim was a couple years ahead of me at school, and we played in some groups together. I went through Eastman, ended up working with Mangione for 7 or 8 years, and then worked with Doc Severinsen. And somewhere in the middle of that whole thing, I got into doing pops concerts with symphony orchestras, and then eventually got a position with the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra. And also during that time, I studied composition. When I was at Eastman, I studied with Warren Benson, and I studied arranging and jazz with Ray Wright and Mangione. But I went back for a couple of years and studied with Sam Adler, a great American composer. And Sam really kind of pulled the curtains back on a lot of things for me. So during my RPO tenure, I got an NEA grant to write a trombone concerto. So I wrote this piece, and it was written at that time. It was they commissioned it for the first trombone player in the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra, Mark Kellogg, and so we performed that piece, and then I had a really wonderful developing relationship with Mark Scatterday to this day. He's like one of my best friends, who is the Eastman School Wind Ensemble conductor. And he had commissioned me to write some pieces, and he said, hey, I heard the trombone concerto, it's really nice. Why don't you do a wind version? So that was kind of happening, but in the middle of it, I was in Vail, Colorado, and my friend Jim Pugh called up and said, hey, I'm going to be doing, well, he had asked me a while before. He said, look, I'm going to do a recording of the Schildkrit, the Schildkrit trombone concerto, and then his trombone concerto, which is a beautiful piece. And he said, and I'd love to do your trombone concerto. And I was like, man, I'd be thrilled. That's great. And then it turned out, kind of at the last minute, Marin Alsap backed out because she had to go to Europe or something, and he asked me to conduct the concert with, the recording with 3 trombone concertos. And in the professional music world, you cannot rehearse for a recording. They don't allow that. If you rehearse, you're on recording scale time. However, you can do a performance and rehearse for the performance. So one of the most mind-blowing things I've ever been involved in is we had 2 days of rehearsals, and then Jim Pugh played 3 trombone concertos in one concert couple days before the recording, and he never missed a note, I will tell you that. So we did 2 concertos on the first half. Second half, I did some little overture, and then we played the 3rd concerto. So that was incredible. A little bit later, my concerto, they played it at Carnegie Hall, and it was a pretty eerie experience because the second movement is a lament, and it's really about 9/11. And I'm sitting next to Karel Husa in the audience. He was having a piece played that night, and he and I were sitting next to each other. And of course, I'm freaking out. My concerto's being played. I'm sitting next to the Husa. But at the end of the second movement, a siren went off, like going down the street on the very last notes of the movement, and it's such a sad movement about the towers coming down, and it was like so eerie. It was crazy. But so since then, I've been just doing a lot of writing and guest conducting, and 2 years ago my season started with New York Philharmonic and ended with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and I just came in from Dallas. I was there doing stuff, so I've been pretty busy, and I've written a lot of music for orchestra, and I've done 2 CDs with the Eastman Wind Ensemble, and we wanted to have the concerto on the second CD, and there's a little bit of a story which I won't get into about recording it, but we ended up several years ago just recording the entire concerto without the solo part, and I've been just dying to have Jim play it. So I think it was a year before last, or a year and a half ago or so.
I think it was during COVID.
Okay, it was during COVID.
That had a lot to do do with why we couldn't really get together.
You couldn't come in, yeah. So I sent Jim the audio tracks, and he recorded. I think you did it at the school, I guess.
Yeah, we did it actually upstairs from where I am sitting right now in the recital hall.
So Jim did it up there. And then we got the tracks back, and of course he sounded beautiful, but there were some issues matching the sound. He actually sounded like he was in a different room. So it took a while for us to figure out what we could do and how we could process that in order to make it feel like it was in the same room, But we played it. We were very specific about making sure there were, the tempos were very strict and whatever, and Jim was able to play around with that, and it was fun. And then there's a place at the end where he does a cadenza, and we had to put a little click in for him to play, because he starts this coming out of the cadenza. He starts in time, and then the ensemble comes in. So we had to go back a number of clicks and give him to be able to do that, so we could put the whole thing together. And then the other funny thing, and I don't know if you noticed this, because you've heard it, right, Jim?
I've heard it, yeah.
Yeah. So the last movement, especially the ending, I wish Mark had taken it a little bit faster.
Oh,
so we just sped up the whole thing without changing the pitch. So it's and actually we picked up the tempo on the whole last movement, and there's a way to do that without changing the pitch. I don't know, the computer, there's a program that does that, but it takes you ask it to do it, and the computer says, okay, go have some coffee and come back in 15 minutes, because that's how long it's going to take me to process this, But anyway, I was just that we could make this happen. It's like a full circle from Jim playing it on the original recording with on his album X Over Trombone, and that's a brilliant performance on that as well. So that's my encapsulated history And I'm going to stop there because I could go on for another 3 hours, but I won't.
Okay.
Sure. So yeah, same
I don't know how
question
to
for you.
follow that. So I guess my turn. Starting out, my dad used to watch Lawrence Welk, which is probably something nobody watching this remembers. Lawrence Welk. He was basically a sort of, I know you do, was basically like a society music sort of band leader from up in Wisconsin. So it was a lot of polkas and accordions and all that kind of stuff. But I saw the trombone players on there, and I sort of was intrigued by that. And I remember my parents had this like expanding like towel rack that you could scoop it over towels, the towel rack that was there, and it came down, but it could also expand out. And I used to run around as a little kid, having seen the trombone players on the thing with this towel rack, playing with it like this, and eventually ended up getting a trombone. Was very fortunate, similar to Jeff, in being. I was actually living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time, and having access to a really incredible trombone teacher there by the name of William Hill, who taught at the University of Georgia. So was very lucky in having wonderful teacher like right out of the gate, and then went on to study with Matty Shiner in Pittsburgh. We moved back there, and then through the advice that I'd gotten at a band camp when I was in 8th grade from the trombone teacher at this band camp, guy named Robert Wigness, who taught at the University of Vermont's retired now, but who said, son, you should consider Eastman School of Music sometime, and I didn't know from Emory Remington or anything at that point. And it always just sort of stuck in there. So when it came time to pick schools, that was one of the ones I auditioned at, and it worked out. I ended up there. Probably most of everything really nice that's happened career-wise has in some way pivoted back to either connections I made there or people I met there. I remember, we had, because Jeff was there, and another person who's a great friend of his and has been a great friend of mine through a trumpet player by the name of Al Vizzuti, who's somebody who's like, we all met, we were falling all over each other. Chuck Mangione helped me. My first sort of big job was with the Woody Herman Orchestra. Chuck Mangione had a lot to do with getting me on that gig. So it's like, it's all, and then other things came from that, but ultimately it all filters back to people I met there and got to know and got to hang out with. And I mean, because we talk to all of you about the importance of you talk about it as networking, but it's almost more like building friendships and camaraderie and all this kind of musical thing. It's like Jeff and I had done, off and on when I was living in New York, done a few things together here and there, but then he's busy doing his career, I'm busy doing my career. We don't see each other or anything for a long time. And then all of a sudden this concerto project falls into place, and we're like hanging out, and he has this gorgeous concerto, and it's like, so all of a sudden these connections that were like from decades before just pop up out of, it's like an incredible thing. So it's those kind of those kinds of things that happen throughout your life that you can pinpoint back to early points of intersection. It's like pretty amazing. I'm on the side of, like, since we're saying nice things, it's like to get Jeff's piece is like just such a wonderful piece of music. I'm so thrilled that Kevin decided to program it and everything. So it's like, it's very cool. I'm very anxious for people here to get a chance to hear it.
Yeah. So focusing a little more on the piece, on the program notes, it's listed as a crossover piece, kind of, across genres and stuff. So what would both of you, I guess, kind of tell the audience, before they come in to hear the piece, kind of what to expect in a sense of style and, what's involved with the piece?
Hmm. I'd almost be interested to hear what Jim says about that. Maybe before I say something, but if not, whatever you think, brother.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, it starts out with a very slow sort of prelude that puts you in sort of an advanced harmonic atmosphere, like 20th century harmonic atmosphere that really doesn't dictate, it doesn't really give away where it's ultimately heading. And then it ends up in like a 3 of 3, like basically 9/8, like triple time, but triple division of triple time with a djembe in there. So there's like very much of an African, like the roots of jazz influence in there, plus like very exotic scales. Working with a lovely tune in there's like a soaring tune that's when it's not being really technical, that's part of it too. So it really is. I know the last move was technically the dance move, but this has that quality too of it too, like chants. There's stuff where the band or the percussion section and the soloist are playing back and forth against each other, so you have the call and response. There's a lot of elements of the roots and core of jazz music that's really in there. Jeff talked a little bit about the second movement. The second movement tears my heart out. I'm getting sort of choked up talking about it now. There's actually one point that I don't think in a live performance I've actually played correctly yet because I've gotten so caught up in the emotion. You know where it is. It's like there's this sweep up and you come in. It's like I get so sidetracked with like the emotion of it because having been there. I mean, I was playing a gig at Madison Square Garden. No, where'd that go? Disappeared. I was playing a gig at Madison Square Garden the night before that. So it's very. I mean, and Jeff being in New York, I mean, it's very much, for you all, it's history, and that's what it should be. But for us, I mean, there was the thing we were there, so it's like I tend to get caught up, and I'll probably screw it up on the 30th too, because it's just all of a sudden my emotion like takes over, and it's like But then the last movement's in funny time signatures. Have to count. But anyway, I'm gonna pass it over to Jeff.
And
now.
you just created an amazing cadenza on that too. It's like, I mean, I framed it, but you did some stuff in there that is all on you. His description is amazing, and so the word crossover might normally imply, well, there's a rhythm section and it's a little, but as Jim said, it has the elements of the roots of jazz. And what that comes out of, honestly, Sam Adler, what an incredible teacher he is. And one of the first things he ever said to me was, you always have to have a good tune. You've got to have a good melody in pieces. That's really important. And from a contemporary American composer who's written every kind of music in the world, coming from him, I thought that was great advice. And then Warren Benson said to me, and so did Sam, they said, be who you are. So in my history, I love contemporary music some, and I love jazz and I love this and, so sometimes in my piece, something just crops up and I just go with it. I'm like, wow, yeah, this Afro-Cuban, after this, I remember taking that introduction into Sam and I had a little recording of it off my computer and I hadn't put the trombone on it yet. It was just like the first maybe 16 bars before the trombone comes in. And I took it in the room and he goes, oh, that sounds like the beginning of a concerto. I'm like, okay, I get that. And then coming out of it, all of a sudden, as you get this boom, 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 you know, and then juxtaposed over this, you know, Afro-Cuban thing. So it just felt right to me. And I've always, you know, I used to walk by Emery Remington's room, and as Jim and people are in there taking their lesson, the chief, as we all called him, is singing along with them. So I always thought of the trombone as this singing voice. And I just heard these, you know, in addition to the technical stuff, but I heard these beautiful, long lyrical lines that really only a trombone can do in such a beautiful, sweet, gorgeous type of a sound, you know. So I wanted to make sure there was plenty of that in there as well. And in the history we talked about, I did forget one thing I wanted to mention. So I do all kinds of concerts. I mean, I did a Philharmonics with Rochester last year where I did Pines of Rome and Rachmaninoff piano concerto. You know, so I mean, that's not my main thing, but I'm capable of doing it. But I do, you know, more pops concerts and jazz. But this guy was a Frank Sinatra singer. Frank had died, and he was a guy who came along and said, you know, I'm going to pay a tribute to him, and he had the Sinatra arrangements. And I started thinking, okay, but Frank got his start with the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra, and Tommy was a trombone player. So I called up Jim, and I said, Jim, I have this idea, like, why don't we do a Dorsey first half? We'll also, and in the first half, we'll not only do, you know, some of Tommy's kind of hits, a medley of those, but we'll do the Schubring trombone concerto on the first half. And then on the second half, you can basically sit backstage and just come out for that one solo on I've Got You Under My Skin, where the trombone comes out and blows the room apart, you know. So we actually did a bunch of pops concerts together for a couple of years. And it was nice to be able to play the Schubring on all those gigs. You know, it was incredible. So, yeah.
Awesome. Do you all have anything else about the piece or anything at all that you want people to know before the concert?
Well, I will say, if anybody ever wants to play it, it's available on my website. I never thought I'd say that in my entire life, but most of my wind music is on tyzikmusic.com. And, you know, there's audio there and perusal scores and like whatever. And but it was a very important piece for me. It was the first concerto that I've written, and I've written since then. There's the trombone concerto. I wrote it, and the other thing Sam told me, and this was also part of the whole thing, Jim. You know, Sam said, look, if you're going to write a concerto, pick an instrument that doesn't have a lot of repertoire. You know, we don't need another violin concerto or piano concerto. So my first concerto that I really care about was with Jim, you know, was the trombone concerto. The second concerto is timpani and orchestra. And I did a timpani and wind ensemble version, and actually there's a cool version. If you look up the President's Own Marine Band, you can see a live performance. It's got 7 drums, and the guy is like, he's playing from all the way here, like all the way, you know. I had to learn about the choreography, because you write all these notes and the guy's like, I'm not an octopus, okay? We got to figure this out. So I ended up changing, you know, a few things. But the middle movement of the timpani concerto is a blues, a 12/8 blues. And the timpani is kind of the bass, and then at one thing, the timpani plays a chorus of 2 choruses of jazz. I mean, it's really an eerily cool thing. And then the next concerto, I wrote a jazz concerto for violin and orchestra, because our concertmaster in Rochester was not only a great classical player, but she's a jazzer too. Most of it's written out, but there are places where she can do her thing. And then the most recent concerto I wrote, and again, I had in mind my friend Chris Vidala. I loved. He was such an influence. He's the guy who really encouraged me to go to Eastman, and he passed away. But he was a senior when I was a freshman. I'd known him in high school. We had played in bands together, and so he went on to play with Chuck Mangione, and then when I played with Chuck, he was there the whole time. So we were just, like brothers. I love the guy, and I always heard the sound of his soprano sax, just incredible, and also Ray Ricker, who was a professor at Eastman, and he retired, but he's a great soprano player, and we played in groups together. And then Wayne Shorter was one of my musical idols. So with the sound in my head of those three, I wrote a concerto for soprano sax, jazz concerto for soprano sax and wind ensemble, which was just recorded, and it's a really cool piece. And I love the second movement. The name of the second movement is "The Weather Report is Cool," because I love the group Weather Report. So I took all these riffs from like Weather Report and Miles Davis. I mean, I didn't steal the exact riff, but I mean, I know that, these kind of weird things. And I wrote this piece, and the wind ensemble is like, man, they are killing it, And the first movement is a really fast swing, contemporary swing thing. And it feels like it's the Gil Evans Orchestra, except Gil would have loved to have one that big, with soprano sax and incredible rhythm section. So once again, it goes back to Sam and Warren saying, "Be who you are," and that genre is in my blood, and so I just pay attention to it, and I don't feel like, oh my God, I'm not going to sound like a contemporary classical composer if I add jazz. I don't worry about it. It's just whatever it is, and so I've been incredibly fortunate to work with Eastman Wind Ensemble all these years, and have my brother Jim, play this piece and really bring it to life. And I am a fortunate human being.
Same here, for having a piece like this to get to play, to have been, well, I guess it's a lot of its path, not all of it, but certainly a certain good amount of it.
Yeah. I think in our early days at Eastman, playing in the rock bands to make money, we never realized we'd be sitting here someday having this conversation,
Right.
But see, that's what Jim talks about, the connections are everything. I mean, I ended up doing so many things with Alan Vizzuti. He's like one of my best friends, just an incredible trumpet player. We did so many projects together, and he introduced me to Doc Severinsen, and I did things for him. And then, of course, my relationship with Jim and Chris, and there's all these people from school that have just, we all kind of check on each other, And then for me as a conductor, it's really fun to go. When I went to the New York Phil, the concert master had gone to Eastman. So people come up and they, I run into people all the time. But when I hear a really phenomenal trombone player, I always go over to them and I say, "So who did you study with? And did they know Emery Remington?" Because, when you hear that gorgeous, sonorous singing sound that's got the right amount of edge to it, but it's not too edgy, but it prints, when I hear that, there's a legacy there that I am so aware of, and I love. So, yeah.
The force was strong with him.
Oh my God. Well, one thing that happened, so when he passed away, when Emery Remington passed away, students went to the administration of the school and asked them not to give his studio to another trombone teacher, but to give it to a vocal teacher, so we could walk by that room and hear somebody singing. I don't know if that was the greatest thing in the world for the next trombone teacher, but it was just something in honor of him, in a way, if you know what I'm saying. So.
Yeah, because he would sing along with every note you played in lessons, like constantly. So it was like when anybody walking by his studio would just hear this, and he had this incredible, almost like a Harmon mute, or like this sort of little rasp in his voice, that you would hear that like pouring out of the studio all the time.
Almost like a Louis Armstrong thing,
Yeah.
And when Chief passed away, in this large, cavernous church, which was all stone inside, and there was a memorial service. 70 plus trombones came, and most of them were the principals of all the major orchestras in America, and they performed the trombone choir works that were in that room. It was like something I'll never forget. I mean, I can remember sitting in that room back that far back, hearing that sound. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time.